everyone. Once again, I'm Samarth,
And I'm Anya.
and yeah, okay, let's get started. Okay, so first off, we have to establish what an evaluation is and why we do it. Evaluations are feedback that we give to the speakers from the perspective of both a Toastmaster and an audience member. Remember, as an evaluator, that you are playing both roles. We want to make sure that we are giving deliberate feedback to the speaker. This means taking detailed notes, including both the good and the bad, and feeling free to give your opinion.
Quality evaluations are very, very, very important. Reason being that if you don't give a good evaluation, then there's no point in giving an evaluation to begin with, because then the speaker doesn't know what to improve on. For the next couple of slides, we're going to be going over the Evaluate to Motivate manual that Toastmasters gives to help make more effective evaluations for speakers. So, beginning with the three things that a good evaluator does. The first thing they do is they give the speaker immediate feedback on their speech. That means telling them what they did well and what they did poorly, preferably with the least amount of fluff words as possible so they know exactly what to improve in the 2 minutes that you're giving your speech. The second thing they do is that they give the speaker tangible points of improvement. That doesn't mean just saying you need better hand gestures, that means giving them examples or a specific set of actions that they can actually work on. That's because if I were to just tell someone, hey, like, you need to get better at speaking, that doesn't tell them what to do or what to improve on, which is why it's so important to have action items in your speeches. The final thing they do is they motivate the speaker. Rather than bringing down fellow Toastmasters, we want to make sure we're creating an uplifting environment where after every evaluation, speakers know what to improve, but they're also excited to give their next speech. That's why it's so important to also motivate the people who you're evaluating in the first place.
All right. In Toastmasters evaluations, the evaluator is the only person talking. This means that when you are the evaluator, you have center stage, especially for your speaker, who is the only person that you should care about receiving what you're saying. For this reason, you should focus on giving as much information as possible to your speaker in your evaluation. Unlike in a speech, you aren't competing for the audience's attention. The speaker knows that you are there for them and wants to listen to you as actively as possible. So you can forget about a lot of the fluff that is required to keep his attention and focus on making your evaluation as productive as possible. Okay. Before the speaker speaks, you should also have read through their manual objectives already. Every speaker has a set of objectives that they are trying to meet through their speech, and by reading them beforehand, you know what to look for and what to expect. While the speaker is speaking, pay close attention to everything the speaker does and show that you're paying attention so they can see you're engaged. While evaluating, make sure to choose your words carefully and be confident. We as speakers are asking for your criticism, however silly you might think it is.
That's 100% right. And then also, when we give feedback, there are two strategies that we can use to elevate our actual evaluation. The first thing is that using language like I thought or in my opinion is actually very effective because at the end of the day, your feedback is your opinion. And what was bad to you might be good to someone else. That's why the famous saying is, one man's trash is another man's treasure. By presenting your feedback as opinions, the points you bring up stop being objective mistakes that someone beats themselves over and rather becomes points of consideration to tweak their speech to impact a specific audience a lot more. The second big strategy is to make sure that you're evaluating the speech, but not the person. That mostly comes down to critiquing content. Stay away from criticizing the topic of the speech or what is actually being said. Instead, focus on how the speaker can present the information they want to in a more effective manner, even if you disagree with the message. That also means that we always apply basic speech rules. Because remember, while these are really high level strategies to elevate your evaluation, it still comes down to evaluating the base stuff that you would evaluate, such as body language, structure, speaking, or vocabulary.
All right. First and foremost, when you're doing an evaluation, you should focus on first tackling the objectives of your speaker's project. Because your speaker has built their speech around meeting these guidelines, you should make sure to mention objectives that they met to an exceptionally high degree so they know that they properly achieved objectives, as well as focusing on objectives that they may not have met to a perfectly satisfactory standard, so that they can focus on continuing to improve these action items in the future, as well as the action items in their future projects. You don't have to go super in depth for these since your speaker should already be relatively well acquainted with the ideas you're trying to present, but they are good guidelines to abide by for giving a speech. All right. Now, these are some things that we have to focus on in terms of what to look for in a speech. First off, although we would try to avoid criticizing the actual content of the speech, it is still very important. And while you aren't criticizing the topic of the speech, there are parts of the content that you can criticize. The main thing to look for in terms of content criticism is structure. While it's fun and often even recommended to deviate slightly from the standard speech structure, a vast majority of speeches should have a relatively well-defined introduction, body, and conclusion, since each of these three parts have a specific purpose. The introduction should have an engaging hook to grasp the audience's attention, as well as a briefing to prepare the audience for what you are about to talk about. The body should contain most of the meat of your story, most of the meat of your speech, hopefully in the form of a story if you're giving a more motivational speech. Stories are the most reliable body for a speech since they have a ton of emotional impact, and it is very easy to interject in such a way as to keep the audience engaged. For more informative topics, make sure you are adding humor or some kind of excitement or variation to the speech so that the audience doesn't nod off. The conclusion should wrap up all of the info you presented in your body paragraphs into a nice little package, and most importantly, should provide a clean ending to the speech. In a motivational speech, you should almost always end off your speech with some kind of call to action, but either way, your last sentence is the most memorable one, so make sure it counts.
Outside of the presentation tips on the slide, there are also some grammatical improvements to look out for. Generally speaking, you should be as concise as possible. If you can shorten a long phrase into a couple of words, then that can really help elevate your impact. Because now, instead of focusing on a mumbo jumbo of 100 words that you put out, the speaker knows exactly what to focus on. That's why each and every word in your speech should ideally have some kind of purpose, or else you can kind of tell when a generally good speech feels patchy in some areas.
Along with the words that are coming out of your mouth, the way you say them is also very important. There are two aspects to your vocal quality: vocal consistency and vocal variety. The first and relatively easier aspect to master is vocal consistency. Things like not stuttering when you talk, taking breaths at appropriate times, and projecting your voice properly when you speak are all traits that will catapult you from beginner to intermediate. When you're talking to lower level speakers or more beginner friendly speakers, you should focus on these concepts. The second, much more dynamic and much more difficult topic to master is vocal variety. If you've ever seen a really good speaker act something out in a way that you could feel the emotions that were coming out of their mouth, this is an example of effective vocal variety. Things like adjusting your pitch, slowing down and speeding up, and changing your volume are all ways that you can show and not just tell your feelings.
Finally, we have body language. This is one of the broadest areas when it comes to speaking. There's so many things to consider, from hand gestures to posture to the way that you utilize the entire spatial stage. There are many purposes of body language. It can add additional emotional impact, just like vocal variety, or it can add realism to a scene by letting you create space. One of its most important impacts, though, that we'll be covering is simply the presence of movement. By using your body in a dynamic and non-repetitive way, you can constantly grab the audience's attention and prevent them from getting bored because it's always changing.
All right. Now, these are all things that I'm sure we've heard of at some point during our evaluations. They're all things we know to look out for. They're all things that are mentioned in the manual. But there's this fifth kind of hidden factor of a good speech, and that is the feeling of the speech. Sometimes a speech that doesn't seem super technically competent can just hit you in a way that you could never have expected it to. Sometimes a speech that seems extremely technically competent can fall short in being memorable and having that lasting impact. And this boils down to the feeling that the speech evokes. At the end of the day, the purpose of the techniques we talk about is to make you feel a certain way, to grab your attention and to make you want to listen to us and truly internalize what it is we are saying. This emotional reaction is important to a speaker. So if you notice it, make sure you point it out.
Remember, feeling is a lot more important than you might think. As speakers, our primary goal for a lot of our speeches is to motivate the audience, not just win the competition. Which is why feeling is a really big part of evaluation speeches just as much as regular speeches we give at the beginning of the meeting. If you can't move your audience emotionally, it is very difficult to leave a lasting impact and ensure that your speakers can actually improve in their skills. This is the reason why we need human evaluators and why some AI could never be a perfect judge of what is or isn't a good speech. Speeches are made by humans for humans, and only a human being who can truly feel something when listening to a speech can properly convey what that feeling is. So if there's only one thing you remember from this entire speech, remember this. We're not trying to win competitions. We're trying to motivate our audiences, motivate their improvement, and motivate their speeches.
Thank you, Anya.
This is our evaluation workshop, but it's the more advanced version with some high-level techniques to elevate your actual speeches. Again, my name is Anya,
Smart.
and we'll get right into it. So, just to start off, an evaluation should contain both positive reinforcement and constructive criticism. Along with giving your speaker feedback on what to improve, you should also make sure that your speaker knows what he or she did well. You wouldn't want a speaker to regress because they didn't receive acknowledgement for something they actually did do well, which is why we always want to make sure we're doing two things, just to reiterate. The first thing is making sure the speaker keeps doing what they're doing right, but the second thing is also make sure the speaker knows what exactly they need to improve on, preferably in a list of action items so they know what they should focus on and what they can focus on a little later. One technique which we advocate for, though you may not have heard of this formal name, is sandwiching. This technique involves surrounding your criticism with positive feedback so as to avoid discouraging the actual speaker. The mistake we see very often is that evaluators will often have their commentary and criticism be entirely unrelated. The key to effective sandwiching is to have your criticism build off of your feedback directly. For example, if you're going to critique someone's body language, talk about how they use their hands really well, but their facial gestures could be augmented to complement their hands better.
All right. And also, I know that we all have this culture of like being extremely cordial, being extremely nice when we talk to our speakers about what it is they have done. And that's great. Of course, we want to make sure we aren't discouraging our speakers. But our first priority is in fact helping our speakers grow. If somebody's speech was really good, but it still had a lot of points to improve, make sure you're focusing on pointing out the points of improvement. If a speaker was really struggling, however, it's best not to give a lot of small points of feedback because that can overwhelm the speaker and they may not be able to properly focus. Instead, and this is something Anya said really well, focus on giving them one or two big picture items to really focus on, as well as tangible examples of how to improve them. By focusing on improving in small, bite-sized chunks, they can properly space their improvement throughout the manual, displaying consistent growth through their journey as a Toastmaster instead of becoming overwhelmed with this expectation of their next speech being this perfect next speech.
And keep in mind, it is so incredibly important to adapt to the speaker themselves. If you know that someone already knows that they struggle with body language, then in your second evaluation of them, you can talk about something different, like their vocal variety or something else that they can improve. Because remember, Toastmasters is about giving as much actionable feedback as possible, which means we always want to add on to what others have said while still motivating our speakers to do better. All of this is one big topic. But I think one of the big things that our like Toastmasters Club in general can improve on is how to turn flaws into constructive criticism. I think the two speakers we had for evaluations, who gave formal ones like Nidhi and Michelle, did an amazing job of making that possible by their use of motivating the speaker and saying what exactly that speaker did well in terms of both feelings and technical abilities. So, this is a really big topic, and it's best explained through an example. Take, for instance, the example we used in sandwiching about body language. If someone had excellent hand gestures, but their voice was relatively monotone, you can show that like this. You had excellent hand gestures. I could feel the anger and happiness you were portraying throughout your speech. And I think you could have accentuated these even further by changing your tone in these impactful moments to really sound angry or excited, just like what your body language was showing off. What that specific example did really well was that it first built off of feedback that was already given. So you're always contributing to the bigger picture. But second, it was a small example of sandwiching. You started out with something good, you had something to improve on, and you went back to something really good that they did, which means that we both motivated the speaker and we gave actionable stuff for the speaker to improve on. In other words, we managed to both compliment and constructively criticize, which is the entire point of this advanced presentation. That kind of structuring is what allows more sandwiching to be even more effective, more so than monotonously alternating between you did good, but you can work on this for a minute straight. One more thing to point out is that in your speeches, while we did say earlier that you don't want to stray too far off the basic structure for actual like speeches for kind of inspiring the audience, like for the contest, For evaluations, you should feel encouraged to change it up as much as you want. Whatever you think will engage the speaker as much as possible and help give the best evaluation possible, experiment with it. Because this itself isn't really a competition, because remember, it's about motivating the speaker.
Right. One last note before, yeah, sorry, Anya. One last note before we really end out this presentation is that just like we say in speaking, evaluation is a way for you to express yourself. You shouldn't have to feel pressured to like construct your evaluation around these very strict guidelines of what the perfect evaluation is. These points that we have presented in today's presentation are just a basis for you to understand how you might more effectively get your own point across. But at the end of the day, say whatever you want to say. Of course, we are not condoning for you to just insult your speaker for like 3 minutes straight. But at the end of the day, your evaluation is you expressing your own opinion. And if you think that there is a certain way of speaking that just makes you better at expressing what you really think and feel free to go ahead.
With all that out of the way, that is the end of the more advanced part of the evaluation workshop.